With Halloween Horror Nights 2023 coming up soon, I would really love to talk about the movies and TV shows so far that have never made it into Halloween Horror Nights houses, despite being so overwhelmingly popular. Without further ado, let's get into the video on this topic. Jaws is the first film to invent the summer blockbuster genre and is one of the most beloved movies of all time. Directed by the young Steven Spielberg, the film is about a police chief, a marine biologist, and a USS Indianapolis survivor trying to kill the great white shark that terrorized the peaceful community of Amity Island, Massachusetts. Some people do not believe the Jaw house would work because much of the killing took place in water, something that would not work in a Halloween Horror Night house. I would like to point out the creature from the Black Lagoon section at Universal Orlando's Halloween Horror Nights back in 2019, for example. In my opinion, this section is an excellent example of how an underwater experience could work for the Jaws house. Jaws is simply too important of a movie not to be made into a Halloween Horror Nights house. It is Halloween Horror Night fans' hope that Spielberg and Universal should make this really happen as soon as possible. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is about a group of people whose town, city, or other community. Alien plant spores have fallen from space and grown into large seed pods, each one capable of producing a visually identical copy of a human. As each pod reaches full development, it assimilates the physical traits, memories, and personalities of each sleeping person placed near it until only the replacement is left. This would be such a perfect fit for Halloween Horror Nights, with the pods can be used for Halloween Horror Nights and the screaming as well. Preferably, the 1978 version is the darkest and scariest of them all. Scare actors being mostly human villains as pod people can be tough, but I can trust Universal Studios to get around this. What's better than being in an isolated underground facility in the middle of a zombie apocalypse in the Florida Everglades? Day of the Dead is a 1985 film directed by the famed horror director George Romero, which is about a group of survivors of a zombie apocalypse sheltering in an underground bunker in Florida, where they must determine the outcome of humanity's conflict with the undead horde. Because the film mainly takes place underground, it would have been a perfect setup for the house for Halloween Horror Nights. The scene with several soldiers dead, the isolated underground facility, and the zombie invasion underground are pure examples of pure terror and a much fit for a Halloween Horror Nights house. The last George A. Romero movie used for Halloween Horror Nights in general was Creepshow at Universal Studios Hollywood, and I would really love to see Universal's take on this movie someday. Although the Thing house appeared at Halloween Horror Nights in 2011, the house was however largely based upon the 2011 film The Thing, a prequel to the 1982 film of the same name directed by John Carpenter. If this house is to be made, I'm hoping it would much better than the 2011 one. To be quite honest, I would love to see a Halloween Horror Nights house based on the original film directed by Carpenter. It would allow guests to see what it's like to be indulged in the universe of the 1982 horror film instead of the 2011 movie prequel. As I said earlier, using houses from the 1980s movies, such as Killer Clowns from Outer Space and Creepshow, would provide an opportunity for Universal Studios to expand upon that for the 1982 film The Thing. Maybe the rumored third Thing movie would come to fruition someday that would make it really happen. Halloween movies have been in houses for the past decade, including the 1978 film, the 1981 film, and the 1988 version. However, what surprises me is that the new Halloween trilogy directed by David Gordon Green hasn't been made into a Halloween Horror Nights house. Unfortunately, the trilogy is already being done, and the best times to do that was during the years between 2018 and 2022. That said, we could always say never. The Halloween trilogy is so ingrained into American pop culture that maybe someday we'll get to Halloween Horror Nights houses based upon the Halloween trilogy directed by David Gordon Green. Michael Myers has always terrorized his guests for years, and his climactic showdown would really show how useful it would be to have a house based on Gordon's Halloween trilogy. And that's all I have to say about that. Stephen King's IT has somehow never made it into a Halloween Horror Nights house. IT is a perfect IP for Halloween Horror Nights. It's because it's a story that revolves around a predatory monster that can transform itself into its prey's worst fears to devour them, allowing it to exploit the phobias of its victims by the humanoid form of Pennywise, a darkly comedic clown. The IT clown is scary as hell, and there are several scenes in the movie that took on its dark path, allowing many opportunities for Universal Studios Hollywood to create several scenes for many scare actors to hide and scare the bejesus out of people. I don't think there needs to be an explanation as to why this movie needs to be in the Halloween Horror Nights house. Because IT is scary as hell, and it's good enough to make it a Halloween Horror Nights house itself. His first IP, The Shining, debuted for Halloween Horror Nights in both Hollywood and Orlando in 2017. The second was Creepshow, which he cooperated with the legendary horror director George A. Romero. IT should be the one of the next phases from Stephen King's IPs, and I hope King would agree to this someday. What could be much more fitting than a movie about zombies being brought alive by a toxic defoliant known to eat the shit out of people's brains? This 1985 horror comedy movie is about two guys who accidentally open up a toxic defoliant can then unfortunately unleash a hordes of zombies rising from the cemetery, and their sole purpose is to eat people's brains.
Take me!
The movie's setting would be so perfect for Halloween Horror Nights: the cemetery, the funeral home, Trash's zombie, Tarman, the police cars, and others, creating this perfect recipe for a Halloween Horror Nights house. Why Universal Studios never do this kind of Halloween Horror Nights is unclear, especially considering several 1980s horror movies were made into houses even as last year, such as Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I hope that Universal Studios touch upon this movie someday, because it has a lot of potential and is the only good and recognizable return of the Living Dead movie out there. It's quite obvious, the 1996 film Scream practically reinvented the slasher genre, where it was already in decline for many years before. Nothing is more terrible than receiving anonymous phone calls with creepy voices only to get stabbed out of nowhere in a surprise attack. Thus, the Scream series is a perfect candidate for a Halloween Horror Nights house. There was also a Terror Tram version of Scream for back in 2011 at Universal Studios Hollywood, but it's nothing compared to the potential Halloween Horror Nights house. The Scream series is so popular nowadays as many questions as to wonder why they do not receive any Halloween Horror Nights house treatment. The closest we could get is 2015, when Universal Orlando announced the Scream house would be coming that year, but at the last minute, it was replaced by The Purge. I think it was a conflict with the masks. Universal wanted to market it and use the original design, not the new version for the reboot of the 2015 TV series, and it all went bad from there. As of 2023, there still have been no word or hint of the Scream House coming to Halloween Horror Nights in spite of the popularity of Scream's 5 and 6 movies as well as the upcoming Scream 7 sequel. So hopefully the recent Scream movies' critical and commercial successes would put pressure on Paramount and Universal to put the Scream House out there for Halloween Horror Nights. The Candyman movies of 1992 and 2021. Candyman is an American supernatural horror slasher film series originating from the 1985 short story The Forbidden from the collection Books of Blood by Clive Barker, about the legend of the Candyman, the ghost of an artist and son of a slave who was murdered in the late 19th century. Although the 1992 film initially underperformed at the American box office, it became a cult classic, spawning the 2021 direct sequel to the 1992 film. So far, his appearances were in 1997 at one of the sections at the Universal's Museum of Horror in Orlando, and his Rest in Peace tour at Universal Studios Hollywood just last year. His appearances in the movies in places like bathrooms and mirrors are a perfect setting for the full Halloween Horror Nights house. This is a no-brainer, obviously. Based on the popular horror video game series, the main series takes place in locations connected to a fictional family pizza restaurant franchise named Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, after its mascot, the animatronic bear Freddy Fazbear. In most games, the player assumes the role of a nighttime employee, who must utilize tools such as security cameras, lights, doors, and vents to defend themselves against hostile animatronic characters that inhabit the locations. The settings and trying to outrun the enemies in the game are a perfect fit for a Halloween Horror Nights house. It's quite obvious the film will be such a success that it would be hard for Universal Studios to ignore it. Universal will have to cash upon Five Nights at Freddy's should the film be a success this year. And I believe it will be inevitable next year or a few.